Hey everyone, welcome back to our study of First Peter on exhortation. And we are in the next larger pericope on suffering and vindication, First Peter 3:13 through 4:11. And we've been looking at the first two sections of this larger pericope that covers the theme of suffering. So this is part two, the present value of suffering. The overall section, which is part 13 of 1 Peter chapter 4, 1 through 6. So go ahead and read those verses, and then we'll continue on. All right, so verse 1a. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude. All right, so arm yourself with the attitude of Jesus. And why is that? And Peter banks back off of what he said earlier in chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And you probably already know what those verses are because we've been going back to this theme of 1 Peter. Live such good lives that others will see it and believe and worship God. And following those verses, Peter writes in verses 21 and 22, to this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example. Those are the key words right there, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. And what are those steps? What do they look like? He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. Once again, going back to what Peter wrote about in chapter 2, rid yourselves of all malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander. And what are you supposed to look like then? Live such good lives among the pagans, okay? What is the church today then supposed to look like? The church should look like the church. No lip service or hypocrisy. All right, we're not just going through the motions because let's face it, when push comes to shove, when we're thrust in the fire, when we're drowning in that deep water, when we're being persecuted, whatever the case might be, and we're in suffering, when we are in mourning, what is our attitude going to be like? Is it going to be like Christ's, or is it going to be something different? All right. Since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourself also with the same attitude. What was that attitude? He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. So what was Jesus' attitude? And we're going to get into that a little bit more as we continue on. So verses 1b through 2, we have a couple reasons. And the first reason, it helps our obedience, okay? Because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. All right, so our attitude completely shifts to something radical, okay? It's something, instead of chasing after this, trying to make myself feel good in this way, it is something that we chase after that everybody else, we're going to see as we continue, is going to be like, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? We are chasing after, instead of all that, we're chasing after the will of God. All right, suffering improves the moral life of the believer. All right, reason one, it helps your obedience. Suffering improves the moral life. All right, it's like, hey, if this is going to make me suffer, I'm not going to do it. I shouldn't do it. All right, I know the end result. I've been there. I've done that. I'm leaving that life, and I'm looking more towards the will of God rather than my own ambitions. All right. Also, empathy is established in suffering. When it comes to suffering, we learn things. We can turn it around and say, hey, I've been through there. I've been there, and I don't sympathize with you, but I do empathize with you. I relate with you with what is going on in your life, whatever type of suffering it is, whether it's persecution or going through a trial of grief, whatever it might be. This, in suffering, is where empathy is established. Now, understand that what we consider trivial, another may consider suffering. And that's where we have to be a lot more careful with how we sympathize with others as well. Not to give them a pity party or anything, because, yeah, we might consider something trivial. I've done it myself. I'm guilty of that. But the thing is, when somebody is going through those trivial things, to them, it might be a mountain climb. It might be an Everest. So we need to have a sensitivity towards them, not to say, hey, suck it up, buttercup, but on the other hand, how can we encourage them? There are sometimes that encouragement might be, yo, suck it up, buttercup. You are strong. Make them recognize that they are stronger to go through these things than what they originally think. So reason 2, verse 3, reason 2, for you have spent enough time in the in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. All right, reason 2, you have done enough sin. There's a lifestyle that is left behind when it comes to engaging in the Christian conduct. When we start to reflect Christ, that reflection dims away all these other things. Now, there's a lot of terminology here, a lot of vocab words, if you will. And Peter goes pretty much through this list. Maybe it's just off the top of his head. Maybe it's because his audience that he's writing to, this is the type of stuff that they're involved in. It's not really clear, but it is a solid list of the things that the Christian conduct should be evading from. All right, now if you remember back in chapter 2, rid yourselves of malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander, all that kind of thing. Now this new list comes along. It seems like if all those things in chapter 2 were the parents, these are the infants, the result of of that kind of conduct. So Peter goes into it, debauchery, a negative word dealing with things that are shameless. All right. Now we could think of many things that are shameful, but the thing is, the way that debauchery works is you don't view those things as shameful, so you just go into it. It is a negative word. It brings on negative connotations that deal with the things that are shameless. We just don't care. We're gonna do it anyway. It's that kind of mentality. The word lust, an overall term for things desired, mainly after forbidden things. When you hear the word lust, you might automatically think something sexual or sensual, but really this word in the Greek, it's an overall general term that means you're wanting something that you can't have. Maybe it is somebody that you're lusting for, or it could be something that I really want that job, or I really want to go buy this thing. Whatever it might be, that's what the lust is. When you want something that you strive and fight and to struggle to get a hold of and have to own as yours, when you should not. All right, so that's what lust is. Drunkenness means, boom, drunkenness. Excess of wine. Now, when it comes to drunkenness, there's always this debate on whether or not you should drink or not, and I'm not even going to go into the scrupulous matters of whether or not you should drink. But what I will say is that if your mind is being impaired by anything, it could be impaired by certain types of meditation, thinking fully, like the whole idea of mindfulness that's been taught recently, new age type ideas. If it impairs your mind away from Christ, then yeah, that is also considered drunkenness. The word in Greek here, it's an impairment. It may not always mean alcoholic drinks or anything like that. That's what the Greeks were meaning here. But in the overall scheme of things, if you're drunk on something that is taking your mind away from what really matters, the life that God wants you to live, then yeah, that is also drunkenness. The next word, orgies or rioting. Now, if you think of the word orgies, you might think, kind of understand what that word means. But again, this is not a sexual term. This one is rioting, which may have also included sexual themes. Used to describe the parading around in groups to sing to a deity, often parading to other friends. The word carries the idea of a feast, which had much food, wine, and late night revelry. Now, when I was years and years ago, I was at a youth camp, and some of the college leaders would get together and just start singing this like really upbeat song, and the words, like, you can learn the words really quick, and you kind of bounce it off to somebody, and they're supposed to like say their name to part of the song, and then they join your name into the song. And like the point of the whole thing is to get you to join this group. Half hour later, there's this mob of youth kids going around singing this song, gathering other people, and getting them to join this whole group to go sing, and just jumping around, having a great time. Now, this word orgies, rioting, has the same idea, but this is all of it's not like a youth group fun and games type thing. Okay, this is all about, what can we do to spread whatever's going on, whatever deity that they're serving. How can we spread their name and spread their purpose, and say, hey, we need to have these feasts, and it requires this, and you have to do it. It's not your choice. If this is the town you live in, if this is the city that you live in, you serve this deity. And that's the kind of rioting that they would have. It's also one that goes into the political realm where, hey, we want a certain thing to happen, and we're going to do it by the power of this deity. And the result is rioting, a lot of things, bad things happening. And now the next word, carousing or banqueting, or a party like orgies, but not in the sense of a local gathering. This word carries the idea of keeping indulgences from others, mainly the poor. It is for the exclusive and not inclusive. Most likely, only the rich and famous would be allowed into such a banquet. Now, if we look back into the Gospels in John chapter 2, this is the wedding at Cana. This is Jesus' first miracle when he turns water into wine. And one of the things that is significant towards the end of this little scene here is that in verse 10, and everyone brings out, in verse 9, then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. And then verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. Now, we think, okay, this banqueting and stuff like that, well, if that kind of thing is wrong, why is Jesus doing this turning water into wine? Why is drunkenness bad if Jesus is turning water into wine as well? But the whole point here is not to get drunk. This is a time of celebration. When Jesus is all about celebration. We look at just look at the Passover. What is he doing there? He's celebrating. He's dining with his disciples, and we carry on that practice as well in the Eucharist. Now, at this point, we have to understand as well that it wasn't just a celebration, but within that celebration, it's a witness. In verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. All right, there's a revelation, there's an unveiling of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. That is key right there, that the disciples believed in him, not because he was like, hey, let's celebrate and let's have a great time and have a bunch of stuff to drink. It was what Jesus did in place of that celebration and for that celebration. Now, another verse in the Old Testament in Amos chapter 4, it's about the cows of Bashan, all right? And this is like really insulting if you want to look at it this way. Calling a woman a cow. Okay, hear this word, you cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husbands, bring us some drinks. All right, right there, it's the rich and famous, the well-to-do, the ones that have all the money against the ones that are poor. And these women are oppressing the poor and crushing the needy. All right, and so why are they doing that? Well, the next line right there is, and say to your husbands, bring us some drinks. Now, I know we went through this whole section about, the head of the house and the husband and the wife, what kind of structure it is. And it's supposed to be this equal thing. But a lot of people think like, well, men are supposed to be in charge. Not here. what's going on here is that not only have they relinquished their position as a husband of the household, but they've also ended up becoming a servant, slave type person to their wives. So they're not even their husband. These men have become their servants. Verse 2, the sovereign Lord has sworn by his holiness, the time will surely come when you will be taken away with hooks, the last of you with fish hooks. You will each go straight out through breaches in the wall, and you will be cast out toward Harmon, declares the Lord. Now, being taken away with hooks, that's a horrible image, but that's the image that God is giving in the book of Amos. He said, hey, you are oppressing the poor, and I have a thing about the poor. I have a thing about the widows. I am all about them. I love them just as much as I love anybody, and you are mistreating them. It's as if like, if you're going to go up against them, you're going up against me. And I don't think you want to fight that. All right. So what happens? They get carried away with fish hooks, and there's not even enough fish hooks. So they get taken away. They're taken away with hooks, but there's not enough. So they use fishing hooks. Like, how horrible is that? And they go out. You will each go out straight through breaches in the wall. And what does that mean? The city is going to get destroyed, and they'll be taken out through the walls that have been demolished. Just the idea of carousing and banqueting is a complete and utter assault, not on just the people that brings suffering to them, but it brings an attack on God, because these are God's people that are doing these types of things, and also God's people that it's being done against. All right, and detestable idolatry. Have no other gods before me, says God in Exodus 20. All right, the word detestable or unlawful before God's eyes. We can always say, well, the law, there's no law against doing this or that, but in all actuality, are we basing our moral compass on what the law says, the law of the land, or are we going to say, hey, this is what God says, and this is what I'm going to live by? So if it's not what God says, that's what's considered detestable. It's nothing, we need to list off what's detestable and not detestable. It's as black on white. If it's not something that is God approved, then yes, it's detestable. All right, so this idolatry or image worship, for example, acts of worship towards Caesar, Molech, Tammuz, Baal, and Asherah, and there's a whole bunch of different gods. Think of all the gods in Egypt too. And what's amazing is at this point when Peter's reading this, they have such an incredible, rich history of their ancestors encountering all these different false gods and all these other nations' false gods, and they still didn't get it. Let's mix, all those Egyptian gods, forget that. Let's go to like Baal and Asherah, and how about we make Asherah Yahweh's consort, his wife type figure, his girlfriend, his lady on the side or something. I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that they did. And that's the result of that was, hey, you lost your land. This is the land I covenanted with you. This is the relationship I covenanted with you. And you broke the covenant by doing all this kind of stuff with the false gods. So right there, what's being birthed is, hey, let's go into this idolatry. Let's worship other things. Let's worship other gods. But Peter says, not only is idolatry wrong, but it's detestable. It is an assault against God and is not approved by God. All right, so verses 4 through 5, the old friends, the former crowd. This is where I got to warn you, this is a tough one. Verse 4, they are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. All right, so real quick, see notes on chapter 3, verses 15 through 17, if you want to review that. on your own, go ahead and do that. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. All right, that's speaking of Jesus right there. That's the kind of friend that we need. Okay, but everybody says they think it's strange. Why do they think it's strange? All right, they're surprised that you do not join them in this reckless, wild living. All right, the reaction is an attack on God's uniqueness and the uniqueness he has planted in each human being. What if we all were supposed to just do everything the same? That would be so incredibly boring. How about every single painting out there is the Mona Lisa? That's just bland. It's horrible. Why should everyone be a part of the same flood of dissipation? The words in Greek, they're reckless, wild living. Another way that it's translated is flood of dissipation. Why should everyone be a part of God? All right, so there's contrasting ideas here that we're living the Christian conduct the way that Peter's presenting it. So the attacks that are given, we still need to go by chapter 2, 11 and 12, live such good lives, etc. People are still going to heap insults on you. So why should everyone be a part of God rather than be a part of that? As a Christian, why should we conduct ourselves this way? Is it more because he will judge the living and the dead? More so because God is unique in his eternal way with revelation and mystery. Okay? Verse 5, but they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. That is so mysterious. The living and the dead, judging both of them. Who can do that? I know I can. I don't even want to do that with the living. All right, but there's this revelation that is being given to people at the same time that there is this deep mystery about God. All these other things that he's saying don't be a part of, the debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry, don't be a part of that anymore, because there's an end to it. Once you get that and you look through it, it's over. It's like reading a book and you finally find out what happens at the end, and then you know what happens. When you read it through the second time, it's like, yeah, it was still good, but I knew what was going to happen. This is what's going on, and this is why God is such an incredible God, because he does reveal himself while at the same time still has such an incredible deep mystery for us to unravel and to look forward to seeing unravel. All right, so this word revelation it's an unveiling. Okay, God is open and revealed. And this mystery, there is more and more and more than our minds could ever fathom to this everlasting God. All those other gods were secretive and had an end to themselves. All right, that's another thing. There is such a mystery to all these other gods. Like, they were contradictory. Like, well, but you just have to understand it. Maybe you don't get it, but someday you will. I don't accept that. If God, if a God is going to do that, it's suspect. It's something a little iffy. Meanwhile, there is our God, revealed in Jesus Christ, who was so open and vulnerable to the point that he hung on a cross to die for our sins. Then yeah, that's something that is not holding back secrets. That is something being completely wide open for all of humanity to look towards. And then verse 6, who are the dead? For this is the reason the gospel was preached even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the spirit. All right, so who are the dead? Those who died after Christ's crucifixion, the spiritually dead and now alive. Those who heard the gospel, believed, and then died. All right, and I'm going to go with most likely the third answer that Peter's referring to, because there could be a lot of speculation that he's talking about believers that were all about Yahweh in the Old Testament era before Christ, that, they would be in heaven with the conduct that they lived. All right, there were things that God had for them. There was a spirit in the Old Testament. There is grace in the Old Testament. If you look, it is there. All right, so I'm still going with this third option, though. Those who heard the gospel, believed, and then died, because this is the era that Peter's living in. This is the people that he's talking to. Like, hey, don't forget, just like 5-10 years ago, this is what was going on. Remember, the biggest part of the gospel is its spreading. And that's what Peter wants the Christian conduct to include. Not just, hey, live a good life, but when you live a good life, others will see it and turn and know God. Once again, going back to chapter 2, 11 and 12. So live according to God in regard to the Spirit. Jesus' prayer was to have God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven in Matthew chapter 6. Jesus' example was bringing the kingdom to earth, and that we can live in it now. If we look back at that verse in Matthew and at the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Seek first my righteousness and my kingdom." It's something that we have something to look forward to when it comes to the kingdom reality being on earth. We're a part of that kingdom, and that's both a mystery and a revelation. As we are a part of it, he is our king. All right. If our fleshly bodies die, we are judged according to men in regard to the body, but we live on in the spirit. All right. Someone's going to say, yeah, you died because your body stopped living. You're decomposing or what have you. But what it comes down to, that's how the human reality really understands what death is. But in regards to the eternal things, when it comes to the spirit, we live and we continue living. And I can't remember what section we were talking about this, but when we first accept Christ, we begin living in eternity from that point on. When our bodies die, we still are living in eternity. Romans 8:10, but if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. Okay. So that brings us to questions for reflection. All right. And remember, this whole section was on the theme of suffering. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of suffering in there, but when you take a step back and look at what's going on, you're having a complete 180 turnaround from a lifestyle going right into the conduct that Christ wants you to live in. People are going to look at you different. People are going to respond to you differently. So questions for reflection. What are the benefits of suffering? What is considered suffering? In light of the list of sins that Peter provides, how should we then respond to suffering? How does transformation change our social interaction? What does the revelation and mystery of God change how we think of suffering? With this in mind, revisit the previous questions. All right, and thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you out there. God bless.